Welcome learners to lecture number 34, which will be on audience reception. Now, we have been talking about the formation of identities, ideas of representation, social identities which are created through the various media processes. But in today's lecture, we are going to talk about audience reception, meaning how does the audience basically receive the ideas that are taken to them. So, I am going to first draw from a leading scholar on media, Sonia Livingstone's work on the changing nature of audience from the mass audience to the interactive media user to talk about audience reception. Now, as the title of Livingstone's work suggests, she is talking about the shift in the nature of the audience from a mass audience to an interactive media user. Now, we have been discussing how basically throughout much of the world, especially in industrialized countries, people routinely spend time and their leisure hours with the mass media. So, the discussion on popular culture and mass media that we have had throughout these 33 lectures, and today is the 34th, is about the role that mass media plays in people's lives, especially in industrialized countries. And what we see is that these hours spent in leisure are often more than they spend at work or school or in face to face communication. Interestingly, if we talk about time spent on digital media, the game changes even more. And despite their existing anxieties about media content and regulation, as we discussed in the previous lecture on censorship, it is also easy to take this media for granted because of its ubiquity as a background feature of everyday life. It is present in our everyday, it is a very mundane, ubiquitous feature, and it is also in the background, which is why the media can be taken for granted. It is through this continuous engagement with the media that people actually are positioned in a relation to a flood of images and information, both about worlds distant to them and about their immediate closest world, and this has implications for not only our domestic practices, our social relationships, but also our very identity. So, what we see is the media's impact on people's everyday lives. Now, Livingstone contextualizes technological changes in everyday life, and this is something that we have also covered throughout this course, where we see new media primarily as locating them within the social landscape and also map the changing social media environment as well as media environment in relation to the prior communicative practices which had shaped this environment. So, this is why the history of mass media is very important. As we have discovered that media today has a relationship with media from the past. The very multiplicity of contextualizing processes, it undermines actually the simple account of the impacts of technology on society which circulate in popular discourses. What we see is the practices of our everyday lives, both material and symbolic, they are dependent on structures of work, family, economy, nation, and cannot be overturned by technological change very quickly. Changes in disposable leisure time, in working practices, or in the gender division of domestic labor, they profoundly shape the ways in which new information and communication technologies they diffuse through society and also find a place in our daily lives. We see an interaction between technology and society. While technology cannot completely alter society and pre-existing social relations, they can slowly make inroads into the understanding of how the social world operates. The history of researching mass communication is also a history of how the mass mediated world, it relates to the social world of the viewer, which is the audience, and even in the short history of the internet which we have, research has already moved beyond characterizing the autonomous online world to thinking about its complex connections with the offline world. This is one of the things we discussed in the digital ethnography lectures as well, that we need to connect the online with the offline world. So, the social consequences of new technologies, they are mediated through the existing patterns of social interaction. We cannot understand the audience without looking at these existing patterns. One question that we should ask ourselves is, how will the new generation establish content preferences in the first place, faced with basically a range of unfamiliar choices, and once they make that choice, how will they share this experience with others, drawing media into the common discourses of playground and office. It is not to say that the media has no influence on society, but rather that such processes of influence are far more indirect and complex than popularly thought. So, central to recent work on media audiences is an analysis of the ways in which people can be said to be active in shaping their media culture. What role do people themselves play in shaping their media culture? How do they contribute to the process of shaping or co-constructing their material and symbolic environments? What is the role that the audience themselves play in these processes? So, media research, it restricts itself to the contemporary, and it is clear that researchers are studying a moving target. What were once new media become familiar, while yet newer media emerge. This is something which is happening at a very fast rate even in digital media. Changing social and cultural context, they shape audience practices. This is something where the audience keep changing its nuances and its needs based on their social and cultural context. For instance, a lot of you may be familiar with this example, that Netflix is now trying to also air OTT content which can be watched while people scroll through their phones. Now, it is a very interesting adaptation by the producers to meet their audience needs and demands, because people have realized even at the production end that most people are today scrolling on their phones even while watching a film or a series on OTT. So, the focus then is shifted towards what to do so that they can scroll and also watch the content. Now, what is happening here is that the audience is adapting its behavior, but the producers are adapting to what the audiences are also seeking for. Interestingly, most audiences today are also not used to very slow paced content. They would prefer content which goes at a fast pace, considering the fact that they can view it at intensities. What is happening is that these audience narratives are changing, and they are forcing the producers to also take note. Now, what we see is a shift from the physically contagious mass spectatorship, like in a cinema hall or a theatre hall, and then we have now an audience which is an interactive media user, and an audience which is also individual, because our devices are individual and we are consuming media individually. So, what we see is a very distinct change in the nature of the audience. Even the half century of national television, which in the USA, Europe and many other countries spans the period from the 1940s to the 1990s, has witnessed major social transformations, including World War, post-war austerity and then consumer boom, and the unsettling conflicts of the 60s, the rise of free market ideology, and again uncertainty affecting all aspects of society, from economic globalization to the patterns of family life, which means that media content has been shaped by these social processes, and so has been audience reactions and interactions. How are audiences made visible in media theory? Audience research, it asks how do the media frame relations among people as one of audience. This is one question that audience research asks. Do certain kinds of text or technologies produce certain kinds of audiences? And the answer again is something which is being looked at by audience researchers. Or how do the social relations among people at home, in the neighborhood or the nation, they shape the communicative possibilities of these locales, enabling some and inhibiting others. These are questions that audience researchers ask. During the 1980s and 90s, empirical audience research, it became prominent in media studies. Sonia Livingstone has argued that this success was due to the productive convergence of several traditions, within each of which there were compelling arguments, and they led inexorably towards empirical research on audiences and their interpretive activities. This became very important to audience research. And for a while, the perception was that the concept of audience is more importantly the underpinning prop for the analysis of the social impact of mass communication in general, and that the audience is actually a potentially crucial pivot for the understanding of a whole range of social and cultural processes which bear on the central questions of public communication, and these are essentially questions of culture. What you see is that the audience gets connected to the social and the cultural, and therefore a need to study the audience to uncover those patterns and processes. So, things move very fast in audience studies, and one can observe basically to retell this convergence as a linear, indeed canonical narrative in which audience reception studies, they provide a stepping stone in the rise of cultural studies. One can also see, as Vincent Mosco has observed, that cultural studies, it reminds political economy that the substance of its work, the analysis of communication, it is rooted in the needs, goals, conflicts, failures and accomplishments of ordinary people, aiming to make sense of their lives even as they confront an institutional and symbolic world that is not entirely of their own making. Interestingly, important though this claim is, by subordinating audience research to the narrative of cultural studies, audience research has in turn become separated from the diverse interdisciplinary traditions which stimulated its development and whose potential contributions need to be explored fully. So, Livingstone would argue that when we think about audience research and audience reception theory, let us not separate it from cultural studies, but instead look at it in interdisciplinary ways. This article and work by Bozi and Zaid on audience reception analysis from the Moroccan context of public service broadcasting in 2014 highlights some of these ideas that Livingstone has theoretically analyzed. That how do we think about the reception of audience to something like public service broadcasting in the Moroccan context as part of how do we understand the audience's social world. So, this study examines Moroccan viewers, especially those with lower education and income, and how they perceive and interpret public service television programming by using Stuart Hall's encoding decoding model and also a focus group methodology. Stuart Hall's encoding decoding model, as we had also discussed previously, is a part of how he thinks about representation, where there is a message which is encoded by the producers and the creators and a message which is decoded by the audience. Now, interestingly, when Zaid talks about Moroccan viewers, they prefer local channels like Al Ola and 2M, mainly watching programs in Darija with interest in social issues, local movies and series which reflect everyday life. The participants, they favored the Moroccan channels despite satellite options. Very interestingly, one can see that local content is primarily given priority, and popular programs would include documentaries, local films, sitcoms and series like OJ Trab. Interestingly, the Moroccan context is presented as a particular social world where the audience is engaging in watching and viewing a local content. Women watch music, fiction, religious and news channels, and men focus on news, sports and religious programs. One can see that there is also a gender division, and this is perhaps to do with the way that issues which appeal to them are represented. One can also see that amongst the lower educated viewers, the loyalty to the Moroccan channels is higher, and this is perhaps again because of the connection to language. shows in Darija, they are most understood and appreciated, and foreign channels are less favored unless the content is relatable. So, interestingly, one of the people whom Zaid interviews, Said, who is an illiterate farmer, he watches repeats of Ojia Tarab for the realism that it portrays. What we see is audiences reacting to content according to their social world. The participants' comprehension, it varies with literacy. Literacy is one of the key denominators. Higher literacy, it correlates with understanding Arabic and French, while the lower literacy limits understanding to Darija and Tamajite. You see that dialect, language, etc. are part of the audience's social world, and therefore, representation in terms of language matters. Literate participants understand MS Arabic, but struggle with French, and many act as translators for family members who do not understand French or classical Arabic. Older family members often cannot understand whether focused on news in Arabic or French, and therefore, they need the support of young family members. What is happening is how Z presents audiences interaction with the way that public service broadcasting in Morocco is understood. News in Arabic or French, it is less accessible, timing issues also hinder the comprehension, and there are ways in which primarily people negotiate these ways of mass media production of content. For example, Hassan, a farmer that Zaid talks to and interviews as part of a study, he explains that he must translate weather info for his family because the others do not understand it. Coming to representation of lifestyle and cultural reflection, participants feel that TV programs in Darija and local dialects, they better reflect their realities and lifestyles, which make the content more relatable and meaningful. So, why are local dialects and content around it preferred is because of this reason, and content quality itself, it depends on viewers' understanding and relevance to daily life. So, here we can talk about what Hall primarily argues, that when we are thinking about the decoded message, it has to be decoded by the audience, but it also depends on their social world. And this is where we can think about the semiotic approach to understanding media as well, that every message can have a code which needs to be decoded, but that decoding happens from the audience's perspective. The participants, they express a desire for programs which portray their social and cultural experiences authentically, and rural and urban lifestyle, it influences how viewers engage and perceive the particular programs. What one also sees is representation of what people are looking for as the authentic and the lived realities of capturing their everyday social worlds. The methodology and data collection approach used focus groups with purposive sampling of low income, low education Moroccan residents across urban, suburban and rural areas, and these interviews were conducted mainly in Darija. 10 focus groups with 8 to 12 participants each in particularly regions like Ifrain, Azru, Dayat Ifra, Khimis, Anjra and Casablanca were conducted. As you can see that there is a good geographical diversity. Participants included both women and men aged 18 to 40, mostly illiterate or semi-literate, and the discussions, they focused on TV viewing habits, as is often the case with audience reception research, understanding, lifestyle, representation and the expectations. The data was recorded via notes and one tape recording. Notes were validated with participants post discussion. Language considerations included using Darija despite dialectic differences, and translation was aimed to preserve cultural meaning through efforts put in by the researchers. So, the methodology outlined is also very distinctive of audience research, where focus group discussions and in-depth interviews are used to capture meanings of viewing experiences by audience members. Some of the key findings were that they watched Moroccan programs in Darija with a strong preference for content related to their daily lives and culture, as we have discussed. Repeated viewing of series also reflects emotional and realistic connection. The understanding of content is linked to language, and basically family members relying on younger, more educated members for translation in case Arabic or French were used. Frustration also existed over certain timings and language barriers in news broadcasts, and shows that use Darija or a mix of Darija and Arabic, they were better appreciated for their quality and relevance. There is a disconnection between the Moroccan public television, which is seen as failing to represent rural and marginalized communities, promoting urban westernized lifestyles instead. Participants agree that most TV shows do not reflect their lifestyles, and they associate these lifestyles with wealthy urban residents of cities like Casablanca and Rabat. The dominant portrayal is seen of as these affluent people, and they feel excluded and inferior due to their misrepresentation. So, these associations with languages like Arabic and French also alienate the rural and lower income viewers. The portrayal of luxury and urban lifestyle is also seen as inaccessible and unrelatable, creating social alienation amongst lower class Moroccans. TV shows depict expensive furniture and homes, and that is unaffordable for most of them, and therefore, the reality that the television also takes to them is seen as something which is unrelatable. And the way that the television promotes an unrealistic magical world of wealth, it does not exist amongst the rural Moroccans who are looking towards television for some kind of representation. Again, we are brought to that idea of representation in terms of social relations and power, because representation is also about social power, and communities, people who are represented, they carry that power within and outside the media world. Participants from rural areas and marginalized communities, they want content reflecting their realities, rural life, land based characters, and they lament the lack of their artists and cultural content. So, rural viewers feel that their issues are ignored or misrepresented. So, they want TV to portray their lifestyles, again basically highlighting the immense role that the mass media plays in generating issues of representation. They also criticize current talk shows for using classical Arabic and complex languages where they do not understand such content. They favor ordinary citizens over experts for relatable discussions, and they seek shows that give a sense of empowerment and citizenship which is inclusive of them as well. Now, when these feelings of exclusion are carried forth, and as audience research shows that this highlights the media power dynamics, where the audience's decoding, it depends on their understanding and relationship with TV content, often focusing on the meta communication, as Stuart Hall would argue. The participants decode messages mainly at the relationship level and not primarily a lot with the content, because when content resonates, they also accept a hegemonic reading, when not, they oppose it, as we see from the ways in which the Moroccan audience is described. They interpret the TV as a relationship message about their social and societal worth. Very interestingly, it means that if they are not represented, it means that they are not socially worth it, and this is what is highlighted in how they connect to the television. TV's use of language and themes, to them it also communicates social hierarchy and exclusion because of how their issues are represented. Now, interestingly, Z also recommends certain kinds of ideas for improving the Moroccan public service broadcasting, that there should be more regional content and training of producers, establishment of more regional TV networks to reflect the Moroccan cultural diversity, use of local languages and dialects which will improve accessibility, addressing local issues might be relevant to the rural and marginalized communities. Producers also need to be trained in critical media studies to understand the social impacts of content that they create, and this is a huge contribution of audience research, because audience researchers have been able to highlight how audience reacts to the way that content is created, and therefore, how media producers need to be extra sensitive to the content that is then carried forward. The Moroccan public TV, it promotes urban westernized lifestyles which alienates the rural and lower income audiences and therefore fails to meet the public service obligations which is associated particularly with a state broadcasting service. And what this also means is that there should be better regional and linguistic variety as well as media education for people behind the scenes. Once again, what we see is a need to what we see is a need to better integrate the backstage with the front stage, as well as the possibility of using audience reception and audience research in multiple ways to enhance the viewers' experiences when it comes to consuming media content. This audience reception trajectory in media scholarship actually presents a crucial juncture where we can take into account of what the audience seeks from media producers to then fruitfully utilize it in content creation. One can also see that sociologically there is a relationship between media, culture and society, as it is very clear that when there is an understanding of the social and the cultural, better media content can also be created, content which has effective impacts and also is able to bring forth more people into the inclusive purview of what is called mass media. Thank you.